Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenqi Yu. Joining us today is my good friend, Ambassador Kurt Tong, who is well known in Washington, D.C. as a veteran diplomat, versed in Indo-Pacific affairs, including economic trade and business issues. He's a former U.S. ambassador to APEC, one of the very few policy forums that Taiwan is a member of. He's also a former U.S. Consul General to Hong Kong and Macao during the 2019 and 2020 protests that consequently changed Hong Kong's relationship with Beijing and the world. Welcome, Kurt.
Pleasure to be here, and it's fun to be with you, Wenqi.
So, Taiwan has been in the spotlight in Washington, D.C., mostly for national security reasons lately. The growing attention could be a double-edged sword for Taiwan if viewed purely from military and defense perspectives. And you actually have offered some creative ideas by incorporating Taiwan into the broader economic and trade framework. Can you share with our audience some of your thoughts?
Sure. My own belief is that as part of the effort of keeping the entire region, East Asian region, stable and prosperous, it's important for Taiwan as a major economic player in the region to be incorporated into the structure and function of the region to the maximum extent possible, given the political realities. And that in fact, is something that is beneficial to Taiwan, but also beneficial to the other economies in the region, and in fact, beneficial to the PRC. And so by nature, the deepening of economic linkages among the economies of the region is important for stability, prosperity, but also it has a geopolitical imperative associated with it as well. And one of my, frankly, frustrations as someone who's worked in this field for some years is that the headline attention is often given to military affairs and diplomacy, which is entirely justifiable. And I'm not saying that those should be downplayed in their importance whatsoever. But the missing piece often is putting together the fact that these economies, Taiwan, the PRC, the other players in the region, are also very much intertwined economically and want to be even more so. And that the urge to merge, if you will, among economies is very strong. And that's something that should be acted on by policy leaders in order to help the overall geopolitical laydown.
But you actually have been in Washington, D.C. for your life pretty much as well, other than the time spent abroad. So you know how D.C. works. If it's not urgent, if it's not considered, sort of attention drawing, it's really hard to get people's sort of, the attention and eyeballs. And so some people would argue sort of, viewing Taiwan from this purely military and defense kind of perspective gives people, especially Congress, the sense of urgency to actually think about Taiwan's role in the region. But, there are also many others who worry that there's too much conversation around Taiwan just about conflict or the potential war between US and China actually puts Taiwan in a more dangerous place. And that's kind of become not just about Taiwan, sort of the broader conversation when it comes to US and Asia. It's less emphasized, in terms of broader relationship, but it's really about the conflict with China. How can we shift that conversation so the US is not viewing Asia just only about China or just about a potential war over?
That's right. And my own belief is that there are multiple reasons why there should be more focus on the economic policy aspects. Perhaps most importantly, because Taiwan, people of Taiwan have the ambition and capability to be important players in regional economic policy. And that, as I said, helps lead to stabilization of the overall situation. And it also gives Taiwan voice and agency in how things are happening.
Less of a victim that needs protection.
Correct. Right. And more of an asset that everyone wants to be involved with, or a strong economy that everyone respects and wants to participate with in creating growth, rather than just a piece of property over which sovereignty concerns are exercised, and to the detriment of Taiwan, in my view, exercised by the great powers rather than Taiwan having voice. So I've been a consistent advocate for a decade or more of doing a formal, binding, full bells and whistles free trade agreement between the United States and Taiwan. Now, free trade agreements are very much out of fashion in Washington, with a lot of concern in both parties, in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party, about whether free trade agreements have been of benefit to the United States.
Can you elaborate more on that? Like, what are the concerns about bilateral or even multilateral trade agreements in DC these days?
So the main concern is that at the same time that the United States was liberalizing access to its market and working with other economies to make their investment environments more favorable, there was a sharp decline in manufacturing in the United States. And the academics debate this constantly about whether this is cause and effect, that trade liberalization and resulting globalization of the activities of multinational enterprises is the main driving factor in the decline in manufacturing in the US, or whether that is actually mostly explained by technological change, new processes coming online, and then also just the basic wage differentials that are very difficult to get around because the US
essentially it's the debate about whether trade helps create American jobs or not. Is that right?
Right, that's right. And so pro-trade economists have lots of models and explanations about how opening markets in net terms helps the United States economy and leads to more jobs and more growth. The difficulty is that the benefit of trade liberalization is spread widely around an economy, including lower priced goods and employment being created in new parts of the country, or new sectors, or new cities. At the same time, less competitive, older sectors will feel pain from liberalization. And that pain tends to be quite localized. And because it's localized, it becomes politically relevant and very important. So this is the fundamental reason why Hillary Clinton and Trump both in 2016 ran against the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the Bush and Obama administrations had carefully created over the course of a decade to fit exactly the needs of the United States on trade policy. And then there was this big, from my perspective, disaster where the US, which had spent a decade creating a comprehensive, binding, and high quality trade agreement that was designed to benefit an advanced economy like the United States, walked away from that agreement that they actually helped create. But then applying this to the Taiwan situation, the merits of a Taiwan FTA are both political and economic. So one can make a strong case that there would be a minor improvement in the volumes of trade between the US and Taiwan, and some increase in income in both countries as a result. But the other benefit would be formalizing the idea that Taiwan is a full player in the global economy by having additional free trade agreements, just like everybody else. Well, Taiwan has two of them with Singapore and New Zealand, but having one with the United States, the largest economy in the world, would reinforce the notion that this is a normal thing to do, which then reinforces the notion that Taiwan is an economy that everyone wants to play with, and that stability is important because of the economic value of all that commerce. So this is why I've been advocating it. Now, not to go on too long on this, Wenqi, but Congress has actually been quite interested in this. And there have been numerous congressional letters with dozens, sometimes more than 100 signatures saying, we should do one of these agreements with Taiwan, mostly because it's a counter to China's efforts to coerce Taiwan regarding the ultimate question of Taiwan's sovereignty, but also, you know, for the economic purposes as well. And so I think there's a political opportunity in the U.S. precisely because of the PRC pressure to act on this and do a binding agreement. So the Biden administration has said it's not interested in any of these, but I think that with consistent effort, this could get put on the agenda.
So tell us why, right? I think there's really no better time to actually talk about doing anything with Taiwan, just because of the political climate in Washington, D.C. So, you know, actually, the administration did launch a U.S.-Taiwan bilateral trade agreement dialogue. We don't know where it's going, to be honest, but what are the main hurdles in the possibility of actually reaching a trade agreement, if politically it is a constructive thing to do? Right.
So looking at the short term, the opportunity for Taiwan is that the administration did launch what it's calling sorry, I'm going to sneeze a second, 21st Century Initiative on U.S.-Taiwan trade. And so this is a narrowed down sort of light version of a trade agreement that doesn't include tariff reduction, which is the thing for which you need congressional support. And the agenda is shorter than a full-fledged trade agreement and some of the non-tariff issues as well. But it is valuable. So in the near term, what's needed is for the negotiators on the two sides to work really hard on this, try and get it done quickly within the term of the Biden administration in order to avoid any political turbulence, get the thing signed, and then move forward, hopefully to more ambitious steps thereafter, which could include, like I said, a full FTA or a concerted effort to have Taiwan join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But in the near term, the key thing is for Taiwan to really use this opportunity to figure out what are all the issues that foreign economies see in the Taiwan economy and address those in the context of this U.S.-Taiwan negotiation. So, and there are such issues. A good guide to that is to look at the U.S. American Chamber of Commerce position papers, Taiwan Chamber's papers saying, here's where the problem areas are. One of the ones that I encounter as a business consultant is questions around transparency and fairness in Taiwan's regulatory handling of foreign investment, including in the financial sector and in some other areas, and whether the decisions for approval of new businesses are being made in a fully transparent and non-political way. But there are other issues that are important and to act on and make the Taiwan's external economic relations smoother, more perfect.
So, you know, again, coming back to sort of why Washington, D.C. Is viewing Taiwan as it is now, obviously because of the China factor, even in the economic realm, it's viewed more important economically now because of the semiconductor industry. Right. There's even this term, sort of silicon shield, in Taiwan because of semiconductor and also the largest producer of chips in the world, TSMC. But, you know, if you haven't heard, it's a huge concern in Taiwan when TSMC announced its billions of dollars investment in Arizona Taiwan is concerned that there's the hollowing out effect with TSMC, relocating thousands of engineers to hiring thousands of engineers in Arizona. What is your view? There's even saying that Taiwan is now being sacrificed for the U.S. attempt to revitalize its own chip production.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the fact that Taiwan, in particular TSMC, it is such a strong player in the semiconductor supply chain. It's not the only player, and it's not the only step in the process. It's important to remember that. But it is the strongest player in a key step in the process, the fab level, that cuts both ways. So on the one hand, it makes people who are worried about the risk of Taiwan getting involved in a violent confrontation or military confrontation with mainland China as a problem to be solved by moving that capacity elsewhere. But at the same time, the Silicon Shield concept, as you said, would be that it would be harmful to the Chinese economy as well as everyone else's economy if this key link in supply chain was abruptly cut off. So in that context, I actually think that TSMC, my own view is that they've handled this whole matter quite astutely by maintaining significant capacity and particularly that some of the more cutting edge capabilities in Taiwan, but also investing heavily in the United States and then also in Japan and perhaps in other locations, and hedging as a corporation, hedging their investment portfolio around various risk scenarios, but also maintaining a strong presence in Taiwan. And so I'm generally of the mind that this problem often gets overblown, and lots of people talking about it in order to try and leverage specific outcomes that are a benefit to their countries or their companies. But the overall situation to me seems more stable and balanced than is often trumpeted.
Well, it certainly it is played up in Taiwan as a domestic political issue, right? The opposition party use this as a way to attack the ruling party, worried about, again, hollowing out effect. And this is whole semiconductor revitalization through the CHIPS Act in the U.S. Congress that passed a couple months ago has been fascinating because it's tied to what we just discussed in terms of, how the domestic U.S. mindset has changed when it comes to trade and globalization. And so, what we're seeing increasingly is that the Biden administration has adopted a industrial policy approach to many sectors that are viewed as critical to national security, including semiconductor, but not just semiconductor, but also green energy. That's what we're seeing. There's this feud between US and EU, exactly because of the US, another major legislation, Inflation Reduction Act, that subsidizes a lot of the, EV making, etc. So as someone who has worked in the sort of free market approach for a long time and advocating for that approach because of what US stands for, how do you think about it, both domestically as well as, internationally, how the US talks about global economy?
Right. And going back to the prior point, I wasn't taking any partisan position in Taiwan politics, just to be clear, between the incumbent or the opposition parties or candidates, just stating my own view on TSMC's rather well thought out strategy. I think the US has bit off a lot in the last couple of years in trying to supercharge specific strengths in the U.S. economy through government policy, and particularly the CHIPS Act and other industrial policies that you cited are, pretty significant departure from previous policies. Not entirely different. I mean, the U.S. has done other programs. The space program is often cited as a leading edge investment in specific technologies that then led the economy in a certain direction, and defense expenditure does the same thing. But this emphasis on chips and on green investments is significant. I think the outcome is likely to be a mixed bag. There inevitably will be more, for example, semiconductor factories built because of the government investment and co-investment in the facilities than there would have been otherwise. But whether this will happen quickly, smoothly, efficiently, I think that the jury's out, because the U.S. does not have an economy that is dominated by state-owned enterprise, nor by heavy government intervention on the investment side of things. I mean, the U.S. government has generally shaped its policy primarily through tax incentives and things which are rather easy to incorporate into business plans and lead to changes in investment plans and structure, but in a smoother and more efficient way than kind of project by project throwing money at stuff. And so I think it's gonna be a mixed bag. I think it'll be, and looking back on all this 10 years from now, people will say, yeah, this accomplished some stuff. Was that use of $50 billion better than an alternative use, for example, in education or in something else that helped the economy? They'll be debating it. It won't be like crystal clear that this was a superb idea.
Yeah, I mean, it is indeed a pivotal moment, I think, for the United States, just given its own domestic manufacturing, capability, as well as all that's going on in the world. So it's interesting to see sort of this kind of approach and economic policy.
Yeah, there's two deeper things going on here too, Wenxi, if I can just point out. One is that the government is less trustful of business to make good decisions by itself. That's a political thing rather than an economic thing. Business is doing the same thing it's always done, but public trust in government is lower, and government trust in business is lower, and all of that creates this.
Can we define it as like bigger businesses rather than all businesses, or are you talking about just broadly speaking?
Focus on bigger businesses, but frankly, all businesses, and it's less supportive.
Yeah, I think you and I remember the time when Wall Street, Silicon Valley were very welcomed in Washington, D.C. But these days, I'm not sure if they're really welcome, at least in public. Is that right?
Much less so than previously.
Yes.
And that has pros and cons. The other thing that's different is the emphasis that you sense on economic security and avoiding risk, as opposed to promoting opportunity. And I think that's based upon a number of things that have happened. The unemployment rate is low, so there's less sense of a driving need to help businesses create new jobs. Is one factor. But there's also just a broader pessimism that pervades American political thinking these days. which I think is true. No, anyways, we don't need to get into a political philosophy discussion, but there's a lot of things driving that kind of atmosphere of anger and pessimism in Washington.
I think it's important to explain to people who don't live in the US that so much of it is really driven by domestic politics. If you look at the Trump administration and the campaign that he ran on, sort of the America First slogan, to be frank, you know, if you look at what the Biden administration is doing, it's not that different, right? It's about prioritizing jobs in the United States, bring industries back to the United States. And, you know, because American security, whether it's military, economic, or defense, trumps everything else. So there's definitely that sort of risk averse rather than, you know, outwardly thinking about bringing the benefits and prosperity to the other parts of the world, because, you know, the US has to take care of itself first. And I think that political transition is palpable, especially, you know, for us living in Washington, D.C. I want to bring, you know, another really important topic to this conversation, because you were the U.S. Consul General to Hong Kong and Macau, another sort of financial hub, or, you know, maybe yesterday's liberal hub, during the time when many Hong Kongers took to the street to protest China's role in Hong Kong's governance. What was it like during that time? Especially, you know, what were some of the most difficult decisions or communication you've had to make as the most senior U.S. official in Hong Kong?
And one point of clarification, when you introduced me, you gave me credit for being in Hong Kong in 2020, and I left in the summer of 2019.
Okay.
Right after the two large peaceful demonstrations of June 2019, and just as the more violent and more sort of directly anti-China and provocative demonstrations were just starting. But going to your question, the challenge that I found was messaging in multiple directions as the U.S. rep in Hong Kong. I was messaging towards the United States that Hong Kong is a valuable platform for U.S. values, business, access to China, and regional operations of various kinds, including particularly finance, but also other elements of business and educational matters, etc. Messaging towards Beijing that that this was the formula that they had established by Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping to give Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy was valuable to foreign countries, but also valuable to China. And that essentially this is a win-win formula that concerted efforts should be made to preserve and maintain confidence in the idea that this formula was working. And so I actually made statements saying, you know, one country, two systems is a success in Hong Kong. Let's keep it up. Was a basic message that I was sending to Beijing, and then to the people in Hong Kong and the government there was messaging, you need to keep using your autonomy in order to maintain strong autonomy muscles as an economy and as a government. So that's the milieu that I operated in. And what happened in 2019, 2020 was a sharp drop in the confidence of the Hong Kong people in the system that had been established, a sharp drop in Beijing's tolerance for Hong Kong being a very different place than the rest of China, and then a loss of confidence and quite quickly an adversarial approach from the United States towards China's management of Hong Kong affairs, where the focus was not on what had been done right and what could continue to be done right, but rather exclusive focus on what China was doing wrong. So things kind of fell apart, and
probably the worst outcome anybody would hope for.
The question now is, here in 2023, what is the situation in Hong Kong, and what will Hong Kong feel like and be going forward? Because there has been a big transition in the city. I visited there recently and found that the biggest change was in politics. Obviously, democratic processes and governance always were had a little bit of a tenuous hold in Hong Kong. It was not a core part of how the city was organized under the Sino-British arrangement, but most of the vestiges of genuine elections and the use of the Legislative Council as a check on the power of the executive has diminished to a point of not really being felt. And then public participation in political matters has dropped precipitously because a lot of it is now illegal. If public activity in opposition to the government can be interpreted as questioning the legitimacy of the government, which is now essentially illegal, and whether that's prosecuted or not is in the judgment or the hands of the government. So that's big change, right? Big change. If you look at the other extreme, and how's the business environment, you don't feel as much change. During this period, while assets under management in Singapore have increased sharply, they've also increased in Hong Kong. And reflecting the fact that from a business perspective, and in particular when one is choosing between doing business or investing in Hong Kong versus the mainland, if that's the choice that one is presented with, Hong Kong still doesn't look that bad. Because the legal framework, the operating rules, the currency of use is a hard currency. The financial markets are very sophisticated. They continue to work. Infrastructure continues to be good. Crime is low, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's still a decent place to live and work, as long as you're not interested in politics. And so that is a big question mark. I think now, from a Taiwan perspective, people are going to focus on the negative, and that's probably entirely appropriate from Taiwan's perspective. The perspective of Taiwan people confronted with the idea that China wants to hurry reunification from China's perspective. But then there is this alternative reality, which is that the Hong Kong continues to function as an economy, not entirely as it did before, but to a significant extent as it did before. And that's going to be, people are going to be puzzling over this. Puzzle for in the coming months. And
I think the question is fundamentally, is this going to be better for people in Hong Kong or not? And that, what happened to Hong Kong at that time actually had a major impact on Taiwan's 2020 presidential election. It actually frightened Taiwanese people, in fact. What happened to Hong Kong in terms of one country, two system, it's not even a consideration now in the Taiwanese, sort of public arena. So there's also this,
and the issues there, once are what was created, to me, what the changes of 2020 solidified is the understanding, one, that the PRC will place political stability above economic
Anything else? Yes.
value, anything else, including rather high priority on economic performance, and Hong Kong being a key part of that performance. And then the question about whether the PRC is trustworthy in promises that it makes in specific situations, which there is another set of opinions on this, which I'm not going to reflect to a Taiwan audience, saying that it was the Hong Kong people that broke the trust, but I'm not going to pass judgment on that today. But but it is, I think, from the perspective of the people of Taiwan looking at the situation, entirely natural for them to focus on the negative perception of Hong Kong's transformation into a different kind of successful economic city than it was previously.
And I think a valid question raised by many in Taiwan was also, what's the alternative, right? If increasing trade and business ties with China is actually not a guarantee of Taiwan's security, which was the argument by some, then what is it, right? Because China is still the largest trading partner to Taiwan. So it is a difficult conundrum for Taiwan, because Taiwan still needs economic growth. The
broader question for Taiwan is in viewing, and Hong Kong is an important data point on this, but not the only data point, is how tolerant is China on constraints placed on its freedom to maneuver according to its wishes, and how much does it value international connectivity and smooth relations externally versus domestic political prerogatives. And that I think is a big important question. And of course, in the context of Taiwan, it makes absolute sense for Taiwan to explore promotion of PRC tolerance in the minds of the PRC leadership, but at the same time have a strong deterrent against aggression. And that's a balance that I think Taiwan leadership has struck skillfully over the years. But brings me back to the initial point of our conversation, is that one of the ways to strengthen the incentive for tolerance, if you will, by the PRC side, is strengthening of economic relationships.
Well, and broadening.
I don't see it as an open and shut case one way or the other. That there needs to be a specific choice between engagement with across straits economically, for example, and maybe I may be counter to much opinion in Taiwan in saying this, but having those stronger relationships at the same time as a strong military deterrent, do not seem incompatible.
Well, the other thing is broadening its economic engagement with the world when it's permitted. So APEC, you were the U.S. ambassador to APEC 12 years ago, when the U.S. actually hosted APEC, and this year U.S. is hosting APEC again. It's a really important economic forum for Taiwan. What would be your advice to Taiwan to take full advantage of U.S. hosting this year?
I think Taiwan should be an active, creative, thoughtful, and substantive participant in APEC, and it has been over the years. But with the U.S. in the chair, it's a particularly good opportunity for Taiwan to propose ideas, suggest specific APEC activities, and the U.S. as chair is going to be inclined to be supportive if they're good ideas. And it may be easier to pursue those ideas in a U.S. chaired year than if it's chaired by a different country that doesn't feel as empowered to move things along. So I think it's a good opportunity. I think at the same time, one of the best pieces of diplomacy done by my predecessors back in the 90s was coming up with a formula for simultaneous participation by the PRC, Taiwan, and Hong Kong in APEC. And I think that needs to be carefully maintained and cultivated through essentially using a precedent to drive how the three participants, the three Chinese-speaking participants in APEC act in the forum. And there's a little bit of push and pull and things, but there's strong precedent driving how affairs are conducted. So as long as those would be the two things I would say: is stick to precedent, and then be creative and thoughtful and substantive on the programming.
Well, thank you for your advice on so many fronts to Taiwan. Thank you for speaking to us, sharing your wisdom and creative ideas. And hopefully, we'll see you in Taiwan sometime soon. And thank you again. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.